Okay. Thank you all for joining us for this session of supporting tweens and teens with anxiety and or depression. Just so you know, tweens is more the age of 9 to about 12, and teens are defined as those from 13 onwards to 20. So thank you for joining me. My name is Judy Arnall, and I have been teaching parenting and child development for the past 27 years. Um, and I am a bit of an idealist. I know the research, I know what to say, but sometimes I don't really apply it in my life. I'm certified in the Growing Brain 0 to 3 and also the Brain Story through the Palix Foundation. And a lot of what I'm going to share tonight is what I've learned. I was a crisis line volunteer for the Distress Center in Calgary for 13 years. And I also taught parenting and child development through Alberta Health Services for 13 years. And I also have been teaching parenting through Families Matter for 13 years. Here's a little there's a pattern going on here. um, but I think my greatest contribution here is that I have a family. I have 4 boys and a lovely daughter. So I have 5 kids. They're the youngest is leaving the teen years. So now they are all in their 20s. So they're in the emerging adults section of life. And we personally have had a child with anxiety and a child who's dealt with depression. So I'm not here to give you medical advice. I am here to give you support and advice on things that worked for me as a parent. I know that when you bring your child in to get some help, they often get prescribed medication, but it takes about 2 months for the medication to kick in and you start seeing some differences. And personally, I found those 2 months the most difficult time ever because I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to help my child who was with depression and anxiety. And we saw positive changes once medication kicked in, but those kids, they decide to go off their medication without telling you. And then, 2 months later, you're noticing the effects and they're right down at the bottom. So tonight I want to talk to you as a parent to parent and offer you some suggestions on what you can do. So I've written a lot of books on non-punitive parenting, and that is what I do. I do not promote anything that's punitive. And I found in the medical system, it was very respectful of my way of parenting. So that was quite nice, actually. I got support that way. So these are some of my books. And I also teach courses. And I found the course that helped the most for me dealing with teens and young adults with depression and anxiety was actually the Parent Effectiveness Training course and their active listening component. There are quite a few courses out there that teach active listening, and I would suggest it's one of the best skills you can have if you're parenting school age children, but also tweens and teens. It really, really helps you develop your listening skills. Okay, so just a few housekeeping things. I just want to assure you this webinar is for education purposes only, parent to parent. It's not to replace medical advice. Feel free and please contact your health professional for any of the points I make tonight, or if you want to talk to them about whether that should be helpful to you or not, please do that. Okay, so where do I get my information from? I get it from a lot of sources, and these are the agencies that I've gotten it from, as well as the books that I have drawn from. So tonight we're going to talk about, in an hour, a little bit about brain biology, which I have learned through my training, but also in therapy with my children and family therapy. I'm going to talk a little bit about what's neurotypical development for tweens and teens, and what are red flags that you should be worried about, and also what adults can do and say to support, because that's what I found. I couldn't get into parenting support groups fast enough to really, really help my child. I want to assure you that every family has a crisis at some point in time. And if this is, if your child is dealing with anxiety, is dealing with depression, it affects the whole family. It affects you as a parent. And I want to assure you, it has nothing to do with your parenting. It is a combination of brain development, of brain chemicals, of stressors that the child may be feeling. If you're here tonight, you are a fantastic parent who wants to help their child, and you should give yourself a hug or ask for a hug from your family, because you are looking to learn and listen. And if I could, I would hug you too. So here's my virtual hug, because it really does put your family in in a in a crisis. It is, not normal life, but it's something everyone has to deal with, and it does pass. It really, really does pass. Okay. So let's kind of look at brain biology. And at this point, I'm just going to shut off my video because sometimes I just find it a little distracting. So I'll come back at the end. So brain biology is mental health, nurture or nature. Let's give you some background on this from what I've learned from the brain course. So anxiety and depression are very, very common, very common. One person in every 5 people on this planet will suffer from anxiety and depression at some point in their lifespan. And it begins in the brain. It's a combination of factors. And so let's look at the brain. Everybody has genes in their DNA, and we inherit these from our families. Depression and anxiety can definitely run along family gene lines. So if you have a parent or grandparent who has dealt with depression and anxiety, it's quite often it carries through on generations. Absolutely. And it's all about a combination of genes. Genes is what nature gives us. We can't control that. We inherit it. We have no control over what genes we inherit, whether they're addiction genes or they're mental health issues. We have no control. The other thing we don't inherit is experiences. So our life experiences determine which of our genes are expressed or not. And the research on whether certain experiences express certain genes, we don't know that yet. We know that stress can cause certain genes to express, but we don't know why it doesn't happen all the time, why it happens to certain people, and what could mitigate that. So genes are the blueprint for building brains. So when you have your children as babies, their genes are inherited. Now, whether or not those genes are expressed depends on the experiences they go through as they grow up. And this just kind of shows you how brains wire. They're very much wired by age 6. And then by age 15, a lot of pruning happens to strengthen those brain connections that are used continually. So I like to use the house analogy. So let's pretend this house is your child's brain. And when you're pregnant, you do a good job. You eat the right foods, you abstain from substances, you build a healthy baby brain. And that's that That's the foundation right there. And then you build the walls, which you provide in good parenting. So you parent with warmth and nurturing. You build good walls on your child's brain and house. But the genes are those little red Legos that are embedded. And the flashlight is experiences. So whether those genes turn on or express is based on what experiences and how they affect your child and who your child is in terms of personality and development. Things you have no control over. Now, nature tells us that the brain develops from the bottom to the top and from the back to the front, and that every child follows a pretty familiar pattern of self-control and brain development. So we kind of know that this frontal lobe develops from age 6 to 12 in most children around the world. And then the teen years, this prefrontal cortex develops from age 13 on all the way to age 25. You can see here from 25 to 50 is probably optimal brain development, and then it stays pretty good for your lifespan. That is nature. That pretty well happens in most of brain development. Nature, too, determines your child's temperament, their personality traits, birth order, obviously, what their learning style is, their intelligence is, their gender, their love languages, and their brain architecture and genes. You can't really mess with these. These are determined at birth pretty well. Okay, now stress in the environment is an experience, and it is that nurture part. Those are things we can control, um, but how that stress affects the brains, we can't. We can control that too. So stress is a person's response to a stressor in an environment or situation. And there's three categories of stress now that research has shown can be beneficial or can be very toxic to people. So beneficial stresses are what we call positive stress, and it's very motivational and builds resiliency. So when your child has to do a class presentation and they're feeling stressed about it, it motivates them to do their research, to plan, to do their homework. And once it's over, they think, yay, I did it. It builds a resiliency. Tolerable stress are horrible things happening to our children, but they're not ongoing. They happen, they subside, and they are supported and buffered by caring people who love them. Toxic stress is prolonged stress. It doesn't subside, it's unpredictable, and sometimes it's not buffered by caring people. An example of that would be relentless bullying of a child at school, and that is not buffered by a caring parenting environment at home. And those kind of stresses, mostly the toxic stress, can really impact the development of brains. So, how does stress affect children? What do children stress over in the teen and tween um, age group? Probably academics is very, very stressful for them. They're trying to do well. They're trying to get good marks. They're trying to pass a test, get more than a 50 in the course. Maybe it's job success. It could be family relationships. It could be their relationships with peers or bullying. It could be their individual fears. And children with anxiety can have a lot of fears. They can be OCD, they can be bulimic, they can have a lot of different fears that to us may not seem like a fear, but to them it's very, very real. New experiences are stressors. For example, the first day on a job, first day in a new grade. And what's happening in the world in terms of news can also be very much a stressor. So this is a brain cell. And what happens, as you've seen from the other slide, by about age 13 to 15, a lot of the brain cells will have all their connections they have for a while. But what happens when we say the brains are still developing, what we mean is that the myelin sheath, the fatty myelin sheath that coats this axon, keeps thickening. And that thickening allows neurotransmitters to go across that um, brain cell faster and better and more efficiently. So we want that to happen. We want that myelin sheath to thicken, um, but sometimes that can be impeded. But that is what happens in the teen years when we say that the brains are still developing. It really is, the axon is still thickening. And the important thing to remember is children act out instead of talking out. Um, Even very, very verbal children, still, you can tell more about their behavior in what they do rather than what they say. So, this is one of my child. He was very depressed, and this was the night before he wrote the Diploma 30 exam in his where he lives. And he was feeling all kinds of stress, and he pretty well just trashed his room. And for us, that was a real wake up call that he needed help. He didn't feel comfortable saying he needed help, or maybe we missed the signs, but we definitely saw this. So we said, okay, next morning we're going to go access help. Um, and that's what we did. But it's important to remember children are not good at formulating words, expressing feelings, especially in the teen years, but they do act out in behavior and take those signs as very important. The other thing about brains is when children or anybody is under stress, the adrenal glands release cortisol and adrenaline. That's the stress hormone. And in small amounts for brief little periods of time, those things are good. They kick you into action, they give you energy, they stimulate your um, sympathetic nervous system, which is good. But it cannot be ongoing, it has to settle down. The other thing too is the amount of dopamine released and serotonin. Those are the pleasure hormones, and every individual has different amounts of those. If you have a child who does not produce enough serotonin, that could be a problem that contributes to depression. So it's very, very good to go get a diagnosis from a medical professional. Again, these things are not related to parenting, not related to environment. They are related to how your child's brain works. And I'm not going to talk much about this, but stress activates the HPA axis. So the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, the adrenaline glands, it releases that cortisol and adrenaline. Those all work in response to stress. And it's okay if they're only doing it in little bits, but chronic activation results in burnout. And that can cause those genes of depression, anxiety to express themselves. The other thing we know is that the release of cortisol, it kind of impedes connection between the temporal lobe and the prefrontal cortex. And very often children who are depressed, they can't use any reasoning skills, they can't plan, they can't function in their prefrontal cortex. They can't be a functioning adult because of that stress and that HPA axis that's releasing that stress. So is toxic stress, ask yourself, is the stress your child facing, is it rare or is it regular? Is it buffered by an adult or not? If it's tolerable or positive stress, it happens rarely and it's buffered. If it's toxic stress, it happens regularly and it's not buffered. So, when you have a child dealing with mental health, anxiety, depression, it seems like other stuff has to be put on the back burner. So, don't worry about school, don't worry about academic progress, don't worry about jobs. Focus on your child's security and survival. They need to get better in order to do those other things. That is the bottom layer right there in Maslow's hierarchy. And every child's unique. Some children can tolerate a lot of stress, other children can't. And it depends on who your child is and what their brain is like. Absolutely depends. So let's look at neurotypical development and red flags. What are things you should watch for? So, neurotypical development is in 4 dimensions. Every child in the world develops in the same way, they have the same um, markers for development. They develop physically, cognitive, social, and emotionally. So, tweens, when we talk about tweens, we really mean from 10 to 12. And that is what I said, the frontal lobe of the brain is really kicking into action. They can think logically, concrete, but still only tangible. The tangible means things have to be in their environment for them to understand it. So that's why a lot of the school curriculum is hands-on things they can see, touch, smell, taste. So um, flights, planes, wetlands, countries that they can actually visit. So development in the we won't talk about 6 to 9 because that's more school age, but the tween age is they're becoming a lot more peer focused in that age. So they're caring a lot more about what people think about them. They may be on social media more. They're definitely have smartphones by then. And that causes a unique kind of stress right there. They tend to grow out of toys, so they don't have a lot of outlets in which to channel their stress in relaxation and hobbies. They're starting to get a bit of attitude. They worry a lot and becoming very self conscious. This is the stage of self consciousness, even more than the later teen years. So, what are some red flags for this age? Clinginess, withdrawal, or quietness, maybe excessive attitude that's out of normal for your child, you know best, bedwetting, nightmares, insomnia, indigestion, stuttering, headaches, fighting, crying, aggression, maybe a dramatic change in personality. So, a lot of behavioral things you notice could be a sign of depression or anxiety for those children. In teenagers, so now from 13 to 19, that prefrontal cortex is developing, so the part of the frontal lobe here, and children are starting to think abstractly. And they're feeling that temporal lobe is activated again, very sensitive. So just like in the toddler years, that teen years is still very much developing. Early teens, age 13 to 15, you get moodiness, grumpiness, good sleepers, especially in the morning, not so much at night, impulsive, interested in their sexuality. Hormones are very much front and center. They're becoming abstract learners and they're interested in adult things and interested in the adult world. From late 16 to 18, definite increased academic focus. And although depression and anxiety can be a part of every child's experience from school age on up, a lot of the depression comes out in the later years. So, mental health issues like um, psychosis, schizophrenia come out generally more around 14 and up. It's not that they haven't always been there, but you see it a lot more. It becomes exposed. They're searching for their identity. They're trying to figure out their values and their place in the world. And sometimes they're becoming more confident, but they still have that sense of um, oh, nothing will happen to me kind of thinking. Red flags in this stage are all of the school ages, but also substance use. Um, Increased peer affiliation, maybe drawing away excessively from the family. A little bit of drawing away from the family is good. It's good at this stage. It's teens trying to figure out their place in the world, and they may, the pendulum may swing another way before it swings back. They're really cutting off until they come back and let you in more and more bigger increments. Definite increased peer affiliation, but you may see things like promiscuity, vandalism, shoplifting, eating issues like bulimia, anorexia, maybe distressed phone time, self-harm, cutting, laxatives. Giving away possessions can be a sign of suicide. And we're going to talk about that later. So those are red flags. Anything that's out of normal for your child that lasts longer than a week, I would pay very close attention to and really notice and approach what help you could give. And and then from 19 to 25 years is what we call emerging adulthood. It's definitely a stage of childhood that final prefrontal cortex develops, this part here where they get their maximum reasoning, risk-taking, um, critical thinking skills. And they're thinking much more logically, gaining more common sense. You can see, I even seen between age 19 and 25, there was a marked difference in my kids in terms of common sense, um, and their thinking very much. And that's where they reach peak performance in their decision making. So let's get to the part, what can you do and say? You're supporting a child maybe who's been diagnosed with anxiety and depression. Maybe they're not at a diagnosis yet, but you want to know what you can do to help. These are things that I found helpful for us. First of all, notice unusual behavior. Notice when your child is acting out of the ordinary. Be attentive, tune in. Um, Before they have to wreck the room to let you know. That's probably number one, is you know your child best. You know exactly when they're not being themselves. Um, so when we had a child with diagnosed with depression, we were very worried on if we got help, how would that affect his future? How confidential is that help? And it didn't stop us from getting help, but I have to assure you that our health system is so amazing right now in Canada, in that we every step of the way, when you first go into a hospital, when you first access a psychiatrist, when you first get a team of social workers, psychiatrists, and caseworkers, every step of the way, they ask you for consent on sharing information among their team. And it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't go to your child's school. It doesn't affect their applications to university. It is not going anywhere. So don't let that stop you from accessing help for your child. It's so important. Maybe to put everything else in life on hold, put school on hold, put jobs on hold, travel, put your child first because they need help. They go in the jar first. The rest can come later. Okay, so what can you do to help your child with depression? Obviously, sleep is what they need. Your health professional may provide them sleeping pills. I remember when my kids were diagnosed, I was so against drugs. I wanted to do things naturally. I didn't want to get reliance on antidepressants. But when I learned how much my children were lacking certain brain chemicals like dopamine, they needed that synthetic um, thing to help their brains, medication. And I've come to accept certain things, and they have had to come to accept that too. I know my kids really hated taking medications, but I would suggest to you, go to the information sessions, make an informed decision on whether your child's going to accept medication or not. And once they're 18, that decision is no longer yours anyways, because they're an adult. But um, educate yourself. And I did too, and I have come to accept that just like I need thyroid for the rest of my life for my body to function, my child probably needs antidepressants for the rest of their life, or at least until their brain stabilizes after age 25, to help them produce more serotonin and dopamine. Um, So validating feelings. So anything your child says to you, validate how they feel. Are they upset? Are they frustrated? Are they confused? Are they anxious? Are they worried? Are they fearful? Validate how they're feeling. It doesn't mean you agree with it. It means that you are acknowledging and you understand how they're feeling, and you accept them how they're feeling as they are. That goes a long way for them to accept themselves. I'm going to talk a bit more about that later. Mindfulness. They don't have to do 5 things at once. If all they can do is concentrate on brushing their teeth for the next 5 minutes, that's what they do. I like to borrow the old phrase, one day at a time, from AAs. Sometimes it's 1 minute at a time or one task at a time. Get them to brush their teeth, then get dressed, and don't worry about what's going to happen the rest of the day. Just move through the day in 5-minute increments. Practice and try and steer them to ways to handle their stress. Maybe get a treadmill, get them to get some exercise. Exercise does release endorphins. It's handy, it's helpful. Definitely get them off the couch and moving. And access help, absolutely. Encourage contact, but don't force it. Encourage them to talk to people, to try talking to people, to try and do an activity. If they feel they can't, then they can't. But don't let that go. Don't let them lie on the couch all day. If you can, encourage them to get off the couch and do things with you. When our child was depressed, we got them off the couch and we said, let's go for a walk around the neighborhood. And my husband and I each took an arm and we walked, and we just walked and walked and walked. And that helped. It was maybe a 20-minute walk at first. Maybe we went for an hour walk. We went for a picnic. We had to do something to get that child off the couch. And encourage talking and expression of feelings. And a lot of times they're disjointed, they're fragmented, they don't make sense what they're saying. Just let them talk. Acknowledge what you think you understand. Acknowledge it. And talk about suicide. You're not going to have one talk about suicide. Keep talking about Keep checking in with them. Do you feel like you're going to hurt yourself? How are you feeling today? How questions are very, very good. They're very open-ended. So what do you say? Things that you should say are just assure them they're not alone. You're here for them. I may not understand how you feel right now, but I care and I want to help. You're important to me. I love you. Is there anything I can help with? Can you tell me how you feel? Those are things you want to ask. Things you don't want to say is, what's wrong? You have a great life. You're smart, you're good looking, you got a job. Like, what's wrong? Or those rationalizations. Oh, just think positive, Or even if you say, I just don't want to hear about that kind of talk. Let's talk about something more pleasant. Those are things that are not helpful to a person. What's helpful is assuring a person that you're with them and you care about them. Absolutely. Routines and predictability is very, very good. So, getting dressed, getting teeth brushed, having breakfast, taking medication, maybe going for a walk, maybe reading. A lot of times they can't concentrate, but finding things for them to do. Okay, what are tools for helping children with anxiety? Um, so, I had a child with anxiety and I had a child with depression. They weren't the same children. So for anxiety, it kind of helped to validate feelings of fear, anxiousness. Again, mindfulness really helped. Again, more practical ways to handle stress, treadmill, walks, things like that. Getting them in touch with a therapist. Now, I really struggled with, do I let them shy away from things that scare them, or do I encourage them to expose themselves to things that scare them? And I found out in counseling that I was supposed to encourage it, but don't force it. So encourage contact with people, encourage going to activities, but don't force it, and encourage talking and expression of feelings, and especially talk about what's the worst that can happen, what's the worst scenario that can happen, and um, and ask if, do they want you to come with them in that stressful event. If they have to go to the grocery store and buy something, do they want you to wait in the car? Do they want you to wait outside the store while they take this big leap and go into the store and pay for something? And I also learned from counseling that you want to encourage them not to run away from the first sign of heart palpitations or anything. You want them to stay in the situation and feel the feelings. And what that does is it lets them experience and know that they're not going to fall apart. They're not going to have a huge panic attack. They can survive that anxious situation, and it's going to get better as they do more of it and their brain connections solidify. When they have lots of practice with that, it gets better because they have successes to remember. And as their support person, you can help them deep breathe. You can help them with a self talk. You can be their companion, but encourage them to not run away and to stay as long as they can. And I like this little graph because everybody who has anxiety, they have a safe zone, they have a really outside their comfort zone, and they have the most scary zone. And this is where we all want to stay, but this is where we need to encourage them to go and nudge them. Now, don't force them. Don't say you have to do this or else. You want them to be encouraged and supported, but not forced. And children need to express their feelings, and art, words, music are really good ways to express it. This was My daughter was very upset when my son, who was depressed, trashed his room. She was so upset. She'd never seen that before. And she wanted to express to him that she loved him and wanted to help. So she painted a picture for him. And that's a really, really healthy way for children to express feelings, not through substance use, but through healthy ways: exercise, art, poetry, music, whatever. Substance abuse tends to bury feelings expression. So when we went to therapy, they often said that children who use substances in high school are often covering up for their anxiety and depression. Um, it's a way to mask it. And if your children don't use substances and are feeling anxious and depressed, they're just one step more able to get help for that. And I'll reiterate, we took our depressed child walking a lot, walk and talk, and exercise helped with endorphins. It helped. The brain works, it's all good. And talking and listening helps too. We did more listening. Some days we did more talking. So let's talk about listening. So we tend to listen, but we don't really listen. And the most important part about listening is trying to identify feelings in your child. What are they feeling? What are they saying but not saying? Are they feeling sad? Are they feeling afraid? Are they feeling anger? What are they feeling underneath what they're doing? And feelings are not good or bad, they just are. Behaviors have limits, but feelings have no limits. Behaviors are things that, well, if you're feeling angry, you throw your pillow across the room. Well, maybe you can't do that. But if you're feeling angry, that's okay. You feel angry. And best way is to approach your child's feelings with empathy, genuineness, and acceptance. Accept all feelings because they're all a part of your child. And when you want to listen, give them your full attention. Give them you, give them your eyes, give them your heart, maybe a hug, maybe your arm around them. Maybe you're out walking on a walk and talk. Listen to them and try and understand what they're feeling. Now, we talk often about passive listening skills. Passive listening skills are what? Just making eye contact with your child, being silent, saying an acknowledgement once in a while, like, oh, really? What? Really? Tell me more. And door openers are the tell me how you feel about that. And then when your child tells you how you feel, what do you say then? You validate how they're feeling. And that's what we call active listening. The problem, if we just do passive listening, the problem is that there's very little interaction. The child just tells us how they're feeling. They probably still feel alone and they don't get a validation of their feelings from us. Now, keep in mind, validating your child's feelings doesn't mean you agree with them. It means you accept how your child's feeling at that point. And you have no choice. You have to accept how they're feeling because that's who they are and what they're doing. So we call acceptance of feelings active listening. So active listening is reflecting back to your child and telling them what feeling you think they're feeling and a little bit about what the situation is as you understand it, and then listening for their response. So you may say something like, sounds like you're upset over something that happened today in school. It looks like you might be feeling jealous. I'm spending more time with your siblings. I hear you're feeling really frustrated over not being able to sit by your friend. You look really angry since coming home. Or for your child with anxiety, you're really afraid to go in there and make that purchase. And your child with depression, you're really feeling listless and anxious today that you don't want to get up and face the world. So notice the yellow is the feeling words. You're identifying and validating the feelings. Now, if you get the feeling wrong, that's okay. You're trying. Your child is there to correct you and express themselves. So that's okay. So what this does is it reflects back what your child's expressed and lets them know you're listening. And it also helps you check your understanding of your child. So guessing the feeling is okay. It shows general interest. So active listening. What if you're not sure of how they're feeling? If you're not sure, kind of start off with, it sounds to me like you're feeling anxious about this, or you're feeling sad about this and that. And if you're not sure, that's okay. Go in a little softer. Say, here's what I think I hear you saying. Maybe you're feeling this. Maybe you're feeling that. Could it be that you are feeling this? So this is a way to active listen, but the most important part is name what you think your child's feeling so that they can either correct you or say, yeah, that's it. That's how I'm feeling. So, active listening um, has many benefits. It moves a child away from the problem they think they're experiencing to maybe a deeper issue. It stops you from saying, "Oh, here's what you need. All you need is this. I can fix you." And it helps the child express their feelings. If they can express anything and they feel validated, that connects into a more intimate relationship between you and your child. So don't just look at the behavior, look at what your child's needing or feeling. What are they feeling under there? And validate that feeling with active listening. Now, what if your teen is a bit snarky and has a bit of attitude? Well, children with attitude is just expressing the same fears and frustrations, but without a nice way of saying it. So, here is what you might like them to say, but here's how they often do say it. So, but keep in mind that your child is feeling deeply, needs that feeling validated and acknowledged, and maybe there's ways you can work on what they're expressing to you. So again, active listening is great. It builds close connected relationships. And it tells a person you understand what they're feeling, not that you agree with it. You're not saying, "Hey, yeah, I agree with you. You should be angry." You're saying, "I hear you're feeling angry. It's okay to feel angry." And another thing, humans need touch. So I my philosophy is I'm going to hug my child. Maybe I'm going to carry them, although I don't do that anymore. They're really big people. I'm going to caress them. So I may just, caress their forehead and stroke their forehead while they're talking. And I'm going to hold them if they need. I remember going into therapy and I said to the therapist, I said, "I don't know how to help him. He's 20, 23. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say." And she said to me, she said, "What would you do if your child was 5 years old and expressing the same things, the hopelessness, the despair?" And I said, "I would pick him up and cuddle him and hold him and rock him." And she said to me, "That's what you do." And that's what I do. I don't pick them up, obviously, but I do provide that touch that every human being needs. And of course, until touch involves consent, and if someone says no, don't touch me, then obviously you don't touch them. But that's what you can provide. Okay, let's talk about suicide. So when I volunteered at the distress center, I talked to a lot of people who said they were suicidal. And I learned a few things. I learned that you want to open the conversation about suicide. And when I became a parent and was dealing with children who had depression, I mean, that's every parent's worst nightmare is, what if my child um, does suicide? And it's just it's so awful to think about. But I think it's imperative that we open up that conversation with them. Some things you can say are, "Do you have thoughts of hurting yourself? Do you have a plan? How do you plan to hurt yourself?" And with doing that, when you open that conversation up, they get to talk to you, they may tell you their plans, and then you can assess a few things. You can see how lethal is their plan. Are they planning to walk in front of a train versus take a bottle of pills? Are they, how available is that? Do they have pills? How specific is their plan? Is it very specific, like they name a date, a time, laid out plans? Because the greater of those things, the more likely they may be at risk for suicide. If they're very general and vague, it means they've thought about suicide, but they haven't had a real thought out plan yet. So don't look at suicide as a cry for attention. look at it and validate it as it's a basic need to talk to someone and to get help. One things we did was contract. We said, okay, please don't hurt yourself until you call us first. And if you can't get a hold of us, here's something else to do. Contact the distress center, or contact your therapist, or contact a trusted relative. So if they say yes, then you have a verbal contract. Sometimes that helps. And remind them suicide is a permanent end to temporary problems. It's not always going to be that way. Um, and assure them that there are many, many other ways to solve problems. But the most important thing is talk about it. You are not putting the idea out there. The idea is there already. You're opening up the conversation and letting them know you're someone they can talk to about it. And that requires you to stay calm no matter what you hear. Stay calm. And as much as possible, get professional help. And the last thing I want to talk about is you have to take care of you. It's a very, very trying time. Um, you need support. You get someone to talk to that you can talk to confidentially. You need time off to have fun and take care of yourself. Um, put your child in good hands. Give them resources to contact if they can't contact you. You really need to still maintain your relationships and your mental health. Otherwise, you can't be a help to your child. There's 24/7 resources out there. Make sure your kids have them. And yeah. So I just want to end by saying the greatest mistake a person can make is to be afraid of making one. And all families have crises at some point in time, but you will get through it. Your children will get through it. The rainbow will come back. It absolutely will. And don't be afraid to ask for help. Look, every family has these moments in time. So um, it's good to get help. I just want to read this poem my child wrote to me after the rainbow reappeared and things are getting better. It was a plaque he made, and it says, "My dear parents, you are the wind in my sails and the hull keeping me afloat. You're the light in the darkness and the warmth in the cold. You are my beacon when I'm lost and my encouragement when on track. You're the jest that brings joy and the signal that pierces the noise. I couldn't wish for better parents to raise me and my siblings, my best friends in this world. Mom and Dad, I love you." And we're not perfect parents. None of us are. Absolutely none of us. Um, we're aiming for excellence, not perfection. So if we're the warm and nurturing parents 70% of the time, that's good. That's all our kids need from us. You are fantastic. You can help your child and support them. Most important of all is listen to them. Okay, I hope this was helpful to you from one parent to another parent. I um, I would love to answer your questions, so feel free to stay behind. If you this is a webinar, so you might be able to ask questions in person, but if you don't want to, you can type them in the chat box and I can answer them verbally. So thank you so much for coming to this session tonight, and I hope it was a little bit helpful. And I just want to assure you that problems are not permanent. They do get better and the rainbow does appear. Okay, thanks.